Alright, hello everybody, this is AW here with Hyperion, Joshua, and Chaya. And today I thought, well, we actually might just do a discussion of sorts. I know most people don't listen to this stuff and even less follow my blog, but I put up on my blog just today a bit on about why I went beyond Marxism, why I left Marxism. Because people are interested in that kind of thing, I suppose. It's definitely one of the questions that people seem to have quite a lot for in general. And one of the things that people ask is either one, oh, what problems do I have with Marxism? And two, well, if I'm not a Marxist, then what am I? And I think it's a lot easier to say what problems I have with Marxism than it is to say what I am. Because people accuse me of being a sleazy dodger because I claim to have no positive stances. I don't actually. I mean, I don't claim to have no positive stances. I do have positive stances. And other times, people want to peg me as, oh, he's a Hegelian. Whatever that means, I don't fucking know. Because as far as it goes, I don't know. I mean, I don't base my politics around Hegel or what Hegel says.
Yeah. Well, people want to define other people by their ideology, especially in our tendencies. They want to you to say, "Oh, I'm this," and then they can just read that and assume everything bad about it applies to you, so that they can say, "Oh, well, I can dismiss this person because I don't agree with this one thing that that person said that they said they were a follower of." Like if they disagree with anything in Hegel, God forbid they ever found out about his contradictions in the philosophy of right, and they would just say that, oh, well, these apply to you too.
Yes, I mean, I don't uncritically follow anybody, even when I was a Marxist. So I'll start with that. I'll give a little bit of history of like if you feel like knowing, well, just check out my Left to Wreckage blog. The latest blog is about that. But I got into Marxism about 2012, I think. It was about summer 2012. Before that, I had been for probably about 4 years. Like I had considered myself, quasi-anarchist, quasi technocrat. I had mainly been influenced by Chomsky, but I had read no Chomsky, and I never got around to reading Chomsky. And frankly, I don't feel like ever reading Chomsky by this point. If I was interested in like a specific historical thing, if Chomsky has written on it, it'd probably be good because Chomsky's just like kind of an autistic machine that just spews like facts at you, and you're like, yep. And so there's that. I mainly got into like a radical. To go even further, I mean, I again mainly started politics. Got an interest in politics somewhere around middle school. 6th, 7th grade. The first time when teacher asked, like, well, what are you? And like, my parents never talked about politics, and like they really never cared. It seems. So they weren't Democrats or Republicans. I didn't know if they voted or not. Apparently, the only time they ever voted for was for in the election with Kerry and Bush, and then the election with Obama. And after that, they got disillusioned, and so they said, "Fuck it." But back then, I just had this typical conservative view, which is not too atypical, I suppose. Because I mean, despite being poor, somehow I bought completely into the whole myth idea that life is whatever it is you make it. If you're poor, it's because you deserve it. You're stupid. You wasted your life away. Whatever. After that, somewhere about I forget when it was that Ron Paul was running. It was probably around the time Obama. Yeah, it was the year that Obama. Yeah, when Obama got elected. And in that, I became further being like, sorry, I'm still here.
Yeah. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so I became
Yeah.
radicalized in that one for the first time, and like I started I got interested in Ron Paul, and mainly because well, Ron Paul would seem like a genuine person as opposed to everybody else. You know, he talked like a real person. You know, he seemed to actually care about his things, and he seemed to kind of know his things. And of course, being someone that didn't know shit, you know, where do you go? You can't just go. Well, you know, so and so says this, so and so says that. You have no basis to know who is right and who is wrong. So you just kind of go with whatever. But I thought, you know, uh, he seemed reasonable. You know, I got a little bit into like libertarianism. I also got caught up in conspiracy theories at the time. Mainly because I thought they were interesting, not because I was buying into them or thought they were true. I mean, I thought it was really fascinating, like what people thought went on in the world, which is bizarre. So there was that. After that, well, Ron Paul lost, and probably what was it? Less than a year and a half later, you know, I kind of watched because of the conspiracy stuff. I ended up watching Zeitgeist, the first movie, and then like around that year was when Zeitgeist, the second movie came out, Zeitgeist Addendum, which was like, you know, a total 180 flip from like libertarian like conspiracy shit from the first one, and then the second one was like, oh, techno communism. And I watched it, and then like I'm a like I've always been like, you have just like strong rationalist tendencies. So I watched that and I was like, well, shit, this makes even more sense. You know, they talk about the origin of inequality within, you know, the systematic forms and whatnot. And I thought it was pretty good. And, you know, you're like, oh, look, this is what society would be if it was reasonable. And I looked at that and I'm like, well, that seems good. And, you know, I got kind of like caught up in that, and I just despaired of like, well, what are we supposed to do? How do we change society? Why are people so stupid? And that was kind of my shtick up until, you know, about 2012. And after that, I actually bought into the liberal myth, which apparently, you know, very few people like. I tend to buy into the strangest things because most people don't buy into them, despite, you know, you all school like it tries to indoctrinate you supposedly to buy into these ideas. One of them was from Christianity. I bought into the whole like, don't lie, you know, don't be a bad person, don't be an asshole, be true to yourself, you know, don't even lie, you know. So when I came out as an atheist to my parents, I did so because I felt guilty about lying to my parents about being a Christian. It's a weird thing to be guilty about, but hey, you know, I actually thought that truth was good. Apparently no one else thinks that.
Hey, I think that.
Well, no one else in general. But so that happened. And then with the whole Zeitgeist thing, it depressed me for quite a while. And I mean, along with that, I found out about Chomsky. I listened to a ton of Chomsky for the next couple of years. And in the liberal things that I bought in was, well, be open-minded. You know, and you know, you got to be open-minded to get the truth. You got to be open-minded to like being wrong, whatnot. So I ended up reading Marx, and I had thought of reading. I took a critical thinking class in which I realized that there were things that were so basic, or I thought they had been so basic, that I didn't actually understand at all. And one of them was the whole theory of rights. Actually, it bothered me so much that in that class we were the second to last essay was, well, you know, choose an essay, you know, write about it. Every other essay before that I had just BS'd and just like turned in, no problem, got an A. And in that one, it bothered me, and I didn't go to class for like 2 weeks. And I ended up turning the paper like 1 week late. And like when I came back to class, I'm like, I just told the teacher, I'm like, this actually really bothered me. This is why I hadn't come to class. I'd been like staying at home, like spending hours every day reading on stuff, trying to find out what the hell it meant. And because of that, and the general, what I was saying, the general liberal idea of like being open-minded, I thought, well, you know, if I don't know that, what else don't I know? And so I thought, well, I don't know about economics then. And so I thought, well, I'll read Adam Smith and I'll read Karl Marx, you know, the two opposites supposedly of, you know, economics. And I decided to read Marx first, and I just straight up bought Capital Volume 1. No, never had read anything by Marx before. I had been forced to read the Communist Manifesto in like 2 of my classes before that. I had just bullshitted on the assignments because I didn't read it. And I still haven't read it, and I'm proud of not reading it, and I don't want to read it. Make of that what you will. But I ended up reading Marx, and the first chapter of Marx, I just went through that first chapter, 100 pages, like nothing. in like 2 days, and it just blew my mind. Like the way he did it, the way he derived it, I had never seen anything like that. Like it was so rational for me, and I was like, this is it. This is like the kind of stuff I've been looking for. All of a sudden, overnight, it's just like, well, communism, And I spent the next 3 years just like really getting into the economics aspects, theory aspect of it. 2 years, like it was about 2 years of just like mostly economics, and then like later on it was about 2 more years of the philosophical aspect of it, which I tried to find out the philosophical underpinnings, because I was by that time doing philosophy in my college classes. I had chosen that as a major. And so through that, I learned Marx, and I didn't read as much as other people. A lot of other people would just read directly from Marx, but I was more interested in the methodology. And so one of the things that ended up being like really important for me was like trying to understand what the fuck dialectics was, and what the fuck all these other things, like historical materialism, dialectical materialism. Why we should believe it, because as impressive as dialectics was in Capital, I didn't understand what was so impressive about it. It impressed me, but I didn't know why. And it clearly impressed everybody else, but I still didn't know why. So I ended up reading quite a bit on that, and none of it really made sense. I bought a book by Bertil Ullmann, which is called Dance of the Dialectic. Don't fucking buy it. Don't read it. It's terrible. But it hadn't been too bad. And after that, I decided, say fuck it. If anybody would know about what dialectics are, it has to be Hegel. And so I ended up finally reading Hegel somewhere about, 2014. I read the first 4 chapters of Phenomenology of Spirit. Felt I got it, or at least I got something out of it. And I reflected on that. I stopped reading it because, it kind of gets boring reading something that's like that dense with nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
So, but reading that, like I immediately, when I read it, the preface already, it's like I threw out everything that everybody else had ever said before that. People are like, oh, Hegel's an idealist and Marx is a materialist. And in reading that preface, I realized that's just bullshit. It wasn't true. So after that, I got into Hegel, waited around for about a year and a half almost. I got to know Yui. A lot of you know Yui on Twitter. Yui Poster used to be on Lefty Pole. He, she, I don't know what they are or what they go by. Doesn't post on Lefty Pole anymore, but they're a major meme poster on Twitter, and I met them, and then through them, I got into the whole Mumble, the IRC, Bunker Chan IRC, and then through Bunker Chan IRC, I got into the Mumble Bunker Chan, and there I met Hyperion.
We met on the IRC first.
Was it?
I didn't know. That was my first day there. Yeah, I met you.
Yeah,
my
I have
first
no
day,
idea.
I met Yui. My second day, I met you because they talked about you being a Hegelian, or liking Hegel.
But yeah, then that was literally just like a couple of months, like less than a month, like before I went on the RC, and then I met you like less than a month later.
Yeah.
And we both liked Hegel, and so we also liked philosophy in general, and at least we agree that usually the highest value is truth, and so if no matter how impressive a theory is, no matter how great and beautiful it seems, if it's not true, it does fuck all. So that's why we started reading stuff, actually. We were like, well, we all like philosophy. And it was summer, we were doing fuck all, so like, let's read. And that's when we started doing reading groups. We started trying to read Kant's Prolegomena, and that went terrible because nobody read it. And which is why I don't do reading groups in which I like go, okay, we're all going to read this this much and then come back and discuss, because I have found out that people don't do it. So which is why
I still have my notes on it.
Yeah, so we all that's why we do our reading, our actual recorded readings, and that's the only way I really read these days. And because you can't trust anybody else to be doing anything else, so if we're ever going to do if there's ever any group reading, or if people want to do a group reading, that's pretty much the only way I like to do it, because it's the only way that you can do it on a timely basis and guarantee that people are actually,
Engaged.
reading.
Yeah, reading and engaged.
And not shortly after that, we got into Winfield stuff, and then I listened to Winfield's critiques of Marx, and that just blew me away. And that really was the major death knell of like my break with like Marxism in general. So that's my history of politics. But yeah, so me and Hyperion generally agree. We obviously everybody just individually has differences. We don't agree on everything, but we generally agree. And so maybe let's talk about what are some differences. What are some of our problems with Marxism?
Oh, okay. I thought you meant between us. I was like, I don't know. I don't remember. Well, I think it's good to state, like, first that we're, like you said in the article, we're still in the Marxist tradition. Like, we're not no longer leftists or whatever, We just don't identify as such because we see it as a meaningless name applied to, just the right. If they call us leftists, it's just a dismissal, and we can't just identify with everyone on the left or whatever, so saying it is meaningless, really. But we're still like we still have a tendency towards thinking that capitalism should be overcome, that something better could come along. But what exactly, we don't know yet. No one
Yeah, like,
does.
we still enjoy Marx and agree with him in many points, but we aren't, like, strict adherents to Marxism.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say we're Marxish in some way. I mean, Marxish. First general disagreement, I suppose, is materialism. As most people mean this, as Marx means it, Marx was never really clear about what it meant. However, it is very clear that it didn't mean what most people think it means. For example, it has nothing to do with metaphysics as such. It has nothing to do with a substance. Marx wasn't like, oh, there's the only real thing is matter, as if that matters. The major difference between Marxists is, we're not materialists. At least Hyperion and I definitely aren't materialists. For the most part, actually, because we don't care. I certainly don't think it's of any importance what stuff is made out of. I don't care. That has nothing really to do with society. Oh, it's, you read Mao, if you listen to our reading of Mao, Mao mentions a lot about matter in motion. Who the fuck cares? Nobody. That has nothing to do with actual social theory. You're not going to base your social theory on atoms. You're basing it on your society.
But also, we should bring up, we don't deny matter anyways. Hegel talks about matter.
Well, yeah. So just means, we place no real importance on the matter as substance. Like, that's just really not important for politics. In general, there's a certain point at which you might be, you could bring in the notion and, it would be relevant, but not as such. So, the idea that all those things, the mind reflects matter, or, material life, what opposed to production. That's another thing. I mean, another sense in which we disagree with that is that there is a primacy to the forces of production. There isn't. Technology doesn't just magically make our consciousness change. There is a mental process that is accompanies technological developments, which precedes it and also succeeds it. And technology is kind of in a middle place. You can't reduce the world of humans to just economics and technology. It doesn't really work that way. Our own lives aren't really reduced that way. Despite the fact that there seems to be a pressure to reduce it that way, most of us aren't reduced that way. What we believe is oftentimes, definitely tied with economics, but also quite distinct from it. And, it'd be silly to deny that things come out of the social realm which then impact on economics, just as economics impacts on the social realm. So, a big distinction with Marxists that I definitely have is I don't place this primacy on material life as such. There is an equal importance that must be given to the realm of ideas. Because how the hell are you going to get out of that material life if you don't have any conception of exceeding it?
Yeah.
You don't just say, well, I don't like capitalism. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we just got to get rid of it. Well, that's not an answer. That's not an answer to anything. Which is part of the problem I have with a lot, even the most theoretical of Marxists. Left comes, communizers, etc. Their solutions are abstract in the bad sense, in which they're like, well, commodity production is bad, so what's the answer? Well, we're not going to do commodity production. We're going to do planning. Well, how are we supposed to do that? Well, we got to have a revolution. And well, how's the revolution going to happen? Well, it's going to be spontaneous. It's going to be the real movement that communizes things. Well, great. What are you doing to do? How is that going to happen? Well, it's just going to happen. That's not a theory of anything. That's not a practice of anything. That's not an answer to anything. Anything to say, Hyperion?
About that?
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, obviously, but
I guess another point where we disagree with a lot of leftists is this idea that capitalism is some conspiracy imposed upon us by the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's kind of a very naive view, which is, once people get some kind of theoretical knowledge, it goes away. They start thinking about it systematically, but nonetheless, it's a very easy thing to fall into. So another thing, obviously, just to go along with the materialist things, historical materialism. But if you believe in historical materialism, I don't know what the hell you read, but you clearly don't look at the world very well beyond, the little pamphlets that you read, which are bullshit by Stalin. Or, and anybody who thinks that the world really goes by, primitive communism, slave society, feudalism, capitalism, and then therefore communism, that's just not how it happens. It's not how it empirically, historically happens, nor does it make sense theoretically. And in that, I also have, obviously then just issues with class struggle. This idea that class struggle is driving history. Class struggle alone doesn't drive history. It doesn't explain everything. You'd have to contextualize class struggle within the entirety of a social whole, in which you have to know who's struggling, what's the struggle over, and what is the struggle leading to. Because you can have class struggle between slaves and masters, which ends up with just the reversal of the slave and masters. The slaves.
They just take power and then.
Yeah. A portion of the slave, a portion of the slaves takes over, becomes the new masters, and most of everybody else still remains slaves. So there's a logical consideration, ideal consideration has to be given as to why this form really changes, and why it isn't just simply a reversal. And without that, you just don't get the advance that Marx posits. And Marx didn't stand by that for very long either. He talks about it in the 1844 manuscripts. Doesn't really work it out very well. He talks about it in the German ideology. Doesn't really work it out very well. And after that, he just kind of says, fuck it. He starts, focusing more on modernity, and then starts talking to the main thing he really focuses.
You cut out there.
Yeah, you kind of. He talks about
talks about the transition from feudalism to capitalism. And even then, there's questions about what's the logical transition. Is it a transition from within feudalism? Is it a transition of something else? And everything I've read, and if you don't think I've read and you said you haven't read Marx, well, fuck you. Yes, I have. You can check out all the videos we put up are of us reading stuff from Marx.
Yeah.
You may think that I'm reading it wrong. Well, that's that may be the case. I'm not going to deny, I'm not completely charitable.
If you had been reading it wrong, then saying you read it wrong isn't really deep. You have to say what we're reading wrong and why it's wrong. Otherwise, it doesn't help us at all.
Yeah, so there's that. But I mean, like, you'd have to explain, why the transition, why the so-called sublation. Because you can't go from, you can't just go from, well, okay, primitive communism happens, and then we discovered agriculture, and because agriculture allowed the possibility of surplus, now there is a possibility in which one group may extract surplus from another. But then why does one group extract surplus from another? Why does this idea arise? Because you don't just go from like we're all like primitive communists and equal, so suddenly we have agrarianism, and all of a sudden we believe ourselves unequal. Ideas don't just happen that way. There has to be some kind of ideal factor that legitimate makes this transition as well. Like the ideas that just don't pop out of nowhere. With a complete break. Likewise, feudalism falls down, but why does that lead to capitalism? Marx doesn't, you can look at the empirical history, but that's explaining something not from within itself, but it's explaining just as it empirically happened, which is an external factor, set of things. That the bourgeoisie, where it began as these mercantilists, go outside, pillage the world, and then come back. Well, that's kind of a historical contingency. Would that have happened? Would the transition have happened without that? Probably, but would it have happened for the reasons that did happen? No. Would it necessarily have been the kind of capitalism that we had? And maybe, maybe not. It's you only know about it unless if you develop it logically. I think, frankly, Hegel has a better account of why these transitions happened, at least on the ideal level, than Marx does. Marx describes the material level, what the possibilities of technology allow, and that's necessary. But there's also the ideal level, which you have to explain why the transcending happens in the first place. And Hegel's account is, well, look, man, our essence is freedom. We are essentially free beings, and if you give us the room for being more free, we're going to want that freedom. You give people the room to become educated, they come to think about the situations in which they're in, they realize, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, why couldn't we do this? Why does it have to be this way? It doesn't make sense. That the priests have this power, that the king has this power, and I have this power, but we're all human beings, we're all equal under the eyes of God. Well, what does that mean? That's doesn't make sense. And this nonsense is exactly what drives people to break with the order. The order stops making sense. So why would people adhere to it? You go out into the world, you have a ship, you realize, wait, hey, I don't need the king. Well, that's suddenly the beginning of nonsense. You realize the nonsense of feudalism. You realize, I don't need the king. I could do without him. Actually, the king needs me. Haha, the tables are turned. So you need more than just technology and class struggle to explain things. Basically it. I mean, if you bring the rest of the things that Hegel has into Marxism, you basically just mostly Hegelianism, and you have just parts of Marxism left.
You kind of have to abolish the freedom aspect because, well, communism, I think we can agree, is supposed to be a classless society, right?
Yep.
but that couldn't survive if you retain freedom, because once you, as you said, individuals have the access to freedom, they want more freedom, they want the freedom to exercise their freedom, so then you could form classes. Again, it would be possible, and it would happen, definitely. Because communism doesn't, as it does, well, it does presuppose, but it's wrong, that it's going to produce some sort of enlightened individual person who just suddenly sees that, I'm not better than that person. I shouldn't exert my will over that person or whatever. But that's not the case. It's not going to happen that way. It can't. You could try to teach people that way, but I just think it would fail.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Soviet Union, China, Cuba are good examples of that failure. In which how could it be possible that the Soviet Union just fell apart? It didn't get invaded. It didn't get attacked. Internally, it literally just fell apart.
It didn't succumb to the attacks, at least.
Yeah, it didn't succumb to attacks, but it just fell apart, and people didn't care. People just let it happen. How could it be that for 70 years, generations grew up with this idea of equality, the virtues of labor, of the necessity of politics, the sham of economics, and yet they looked to the West and they said, look, the West has all these other things. The West has freedom of speech. The West has all this abundance of production. And here we're being told, we are the superior ones, and at the same time, well, we look, people look at themselves and they see the sham. You can't lie to people with things that aren't true when they see for themselves that a possibility exists that something can transcend the limitations which they have. You can't tell people that they're free and then tell them, but you can't say these things. You can't tell people that they're free, but tell them, look, you can't believe these things. You can't tell people that they're free, but then have them, be assigned a job. What is it that they used to do in the Soviet Union, aptitude tests? You can't tell people that they're free and then tell them, well, you can't leave the country whenever you want. You can't move around however you want. You can't go and work with whatever you want or whoever you want. It's a sham. And so a lot of the historical existing communist states, and let's admit it, despite the fact people are going to come in and say, well, that wasn't real communism. We know. Theoretically, but let's not, people can't deny that these were movements led by those and made by those who were aiming at the vision of communism. And so, you get the stuff like the tankies who say, well, we got to suppress, we can't have freedom of speech, the bourgeois may return. But, if your victory rests on a general mass suppression, I don't know how you expect to win.
Yeah. Which, of course, that is a legitimate thing that they posit. I mean, it's true that if you want that, you can't allow for that, but then freedom's gone.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a certain point in which you have to realize the project is hopeless when you've gone, quite a time in which the repression is endless.
Yeah, Terry Eagleton said that history could culminate in what Marx called the common ruination of classes. That is, getting rid of class, but well, obviously Marx thought that capitalism was bound to become flawed, and then the proletariat would rise up, because it's logical that they would want to do that if they recognize themselves as being subordinated. But if that happens, obviously it happens in some sort of isolated and impoverished part of the world. It doesn't happen in America. No one is going to have a revolution, quote unquote, in a country where you can buy a $1 hamburger and you don't have to worry about starvation. So it always happens in the isolated parts of the world that isolated from like wealth, global, the wealth of the common person, like a middle class, quote unquote. So that results in some sort of Stalinism type deal. But then, of course, like Terry Eagleton said, well, yeah, that happens, but the common people could again rise against the bureaucracy. Just not likely, and it just results in a lot of unnecessary trouble.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's just based on a hope of, like, an indeterminate hope, in my opinion, in which,
Yeah.
I mean, it puts too much of, oh, well, you know, people are going to realize that they're oppressed, and, you know, they're going to go, like, well, why should we be oppressed, and all of a sudden rise up. That's not how it happens. I mean, that's not how the French Revolution happened. That's not how 1917 happened. That's not how the Chinese Revolution happens. It's not how the Cuban Revolution happens. I mean, like, people are willing to take an immense amount of material and psychological punishment in this world, which is, baffling.
Yeah.
And
Well-
the moments in which, like, that suddenly you have a revolutionary break are literally unpredictable. The strangest things cause them to happen. And usually it seems to be that it's tied to a fucking idiot, in power. An idiot is in power who just doesn't know the limits of where he should just, like, stop beating the dog. The dog is a cow. The dog is afraid. It's like it's gonna whimper as much as you hit it, but at one point, you've gone too far, and it's just gonna fucking turn around and snap and bite your hand. And I mean, what happens in France? The king doesn't know the limit of where to not give a fuck. He spends too long a time not giving a fuck. I mean, literally, Robespierre was an ardent monarchist, like slightly, barely liberal ass.
You cut out again.
He meets the king, and the king, just kind of looks at him, doesn't even look at him, and he had written like his whole speech welcoming him to like a university or whatever, and the king just like rode by past, and that's what turned him radical. Those little things, what is it that turned all France radical? Well, by the way, that Marie Antoinette. Besides it being a myth that Marie Antoinette, said "let them eat cake," that kind of thing is basically what caused it. Literally a set of morons in power who just don't know when to stop being.
That sort of attitude. I think the implication of that quote is like the ignorance of the bourgeoisie, or the ruling class.
The ruling class,
they don't know that, like,
they're disconnected from the world.
Yeah, it's just like celebrity today. They don't understand the plight of the common person.
But I mean, it literally takes someone that's stupid. Like, that's kind of the thing. Historically, it seems to take someone literally that stupid to be that disconnected from the world that they would just let it burn before they realize it's burning. And then once it's burning, well, it's over. What happens in 1917, people are going to have a peaceful demonstration in Petrograd, to appeal to the king. Or what was he? Was he a king? The Tsar?
Who? The Tsar? Yeah.
Yeah, the Tsar.
Tsar.
To
Caesar.
Yeah.
Ruler.
I forget what it was that they were appealing to, but I mean, it wasn't even a protest. It was just like a demonstration of and they were carrying like the pictures
hungry.
of they wanted some help, and so the king's just what does the Tsar do? Just fucking shoots them. What happens then? Revolution breaks out. All of a sudden, all hope is lost. All faith is lost in the system. What happens in China? Chiang Kai-shek was literally brain dead. That's the only reason Mao got anywhere. Like the guy was a moron, and like he screwed up, and he kept screwing up, and kept screwing up, and like it took him to be a brain dead moron to lose China. What happens with Cuba, I don't know too much about Cuba, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was yet again the same thing. A moron who gets in power and just like becomes so disconnected with the state of things that he doesn't realize, he's fucking people too hard, and that people have had enough.
Well, that's like exactly what Batista did.
Yeah. So, the whole class struggle doesn't just automatically lead to this. There isn't so much of class struggle as, like, there comes a moron who literally doesn't even realize there's a class struggle. He just thinks, there's those little enemies on the side, those little ants, oh, we'll take care of them. And the people, well, who cares about the people?
So is it a sort of accelerationist type thing? Do things have to get so bad that people eventually, quote unquote, rise up?
Well, in a way, yes, but in a second thing, just getting bad is not enough. People have to literally lose hope that the people who had, that there is someone that can do something, and that those people who are in power who can do something are willfully not doing something because they just don't care.
Well, there's also, like, just to kind of interject here, just from a classical Marxist perspective, I guess you could say that one of the other factors in this too has to do with things like hegemony and whether or not there is like a viable alternative for the working class to be struggling towards. Because you can have a scenario where, okay, everyone hates this moron who's in power and they overthrow him, but who replaces him? Like, what kind of system comes after him? And the whole, the whole deterministic idea that, like, okay, well, the oppressed just naturally want socialism, they're just naturally have it in them to desire communism. That really hasn't played out to be all that true, if you look at history. I mean, we can just look at, I don't know, like Iran, Algeria, where the national bourgeoisie took over, Indonesia, they had a dictator who slaughtered a bunch of communists. I mean, the revolutionaries, so to say, have to be on their game and they have to take this stuff into account. But I mean, I guess that's something we already know. So
Yeah. So there's the ideal aspect as well, which people have to take into account. You have to have a message that actually reaches the people, because you can have a message, but it might just not break through. These subjective conditions are not there for your choosing. We can't all. You don't know. Who is receptive, and to what extent they are receptive.
Mm-hmm. And the revolutionary, their ideals are, by nature, unpopular, unconventional. But what they must do is exploit this moment when the popular is collapsing, when people realize, oh, this state is fucking stupid, capitalism is stupid,
Yeah, pretty much. And you can't just come out of nowhere, because you don't. You don't get Lenin overnight. Suddenly something happens. A guy named Lenin appears and says, "I have a answer." That's not how it works. The only reason people manage to turn to Lenin is because Lenin already has had an organization, going on. Small as it was still, an organization. People knew him. As a matter of 1917 was kind of a lucky break because the very nature of the world then was like very centralized as it was. Lenin didn't have to convince the masses of the peasants in the Soviet Union. They just had to convince the workers in the cities, and that was something they were already engaged in. They were already engaged in the union movements. They were already in parts of it, and people saw them as leaders. But can you do that today? I just don't see how you can repeat that particular form today. You can't do the whole unionization movement anymore. We don't have a union movement whatsoever. You can't just come out of nowhere and say, oh, we are the party of the people. Well, what people? People don't like your ideas. People don't care about your ideas. In the U.S. particularly. Honduras right now, for example, is going to go in a crisis, which the elections were basically blatantly stolen, and over the last month, shit's been going down like big time. And this, I think it was yesterday, the electoral tribunal finally said, well, the elections are legit, therefore the guy who stole the elections is going to stay as president. It's up to the people now to decide, what are they going to do? Are they actually going to... The elections were stolen the last time, before the coup happened. When the coup happened, and then they returned to regular elections, they stole those. And they stole them again this year even more blatantly. And, even if, for example, the people rise up, do you think they're going to rise up for socialism? No. People in Honduras, despite being motherfucking poor, like poor of the poor, I mean, murder capital of the world, they are generally reactionary. So being poor itself, you're right, it is not good enough. Being poor doesn't make you receptive to socialism. Is it because socialists don't exist in Honduras? Absolutely not, dude. Like, most of the fucking academics are fucking like complete reds. Yet people don't like them. People don't buy into their ideas. The SOCDEM party, which is pink tide, level SOCDEMs, barely have, just about slightly more than half of the country's support. And it's mainly because things are really bad, not because people, actually understand what the issues are. But, they're tired of the fucking right wing just, fucking pillaging the country. They've been running the country for decades, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Well, time to vote in the fucking leftists. But, they're not the radical leftists. They're basically just the SOCDEMs. And, if people are saying, he's like, oh, well, nothing's going to change that. You can't just jump, you can't just jump to purely revolutionary politics without an acclamation to your ideas of revolutionary politics. The only reason it worked for, before was because, well, shit was really, really fucked, and the people who were already, the masses of workers were already primed for that kind of idea. The very life they lived, was a lot more social labor than it is today, directly social, and then which we could see. You work in a factory with literally hundreds of people every day. You see who does the real work. Who does the real. Who has the real power to run the shit. And you have the solidarity, but nowadays that's just not the case. So yeah, mere class struggle doesn't lead to a transcendence. To cut that one short. So what else?
I don't know. I just think we need to try to exceed the nation state eventually, and the logic of ever expanding capital. Maybe we should talk about that. That capital is there's no limit to what the capitalist wants to earn. Do you think that's worth going into?
Well, no, I mean, that's in agreement with Marxists. I mean,
yeah. Now that specifically the whole, the capitalist is just watching the number increase, not, trying to get enough money for anything really, particularly the love of money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's kind of a thing with Marxists, we agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's not something that, we have any difference in, and it's...
No.
So it's not a different positive assertion of any kind.
But our positive assertion is that, well, from David P. Levine, is that they should be trying to better society with their capital, but they don't. So what's the implication? Well, I mean...
No, let's leave that for a little bit. Another thing that I just want to change... Well, just to continue on the Marxist thing.
Sure.
Another disagreement is dialectics. It's...
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, generally, I think people know this, but if you read my stuff or listen to me, or if you ever read my stuff on Lefty Pool, I don't agree that Marxists understand what dialectics are generally. And mainly because, one, the things they want to use it for is just not doable. really. I mean, you can't have a dialectics of history in the way that they think they have. They make no distinctions between something which is called a negative dialectics and something else which is called, the positive dialectics. I definitely disagree with Marxists in that, they see capital as something that's just another dialectic. You get primitive communism, dialectic, goes on to slave society dialectic, goes on to feudalist dialectic, goes on to capitalist dialectics, goes on to communism. And communism itself won't be a dialectic anymore because it will be a negative sublation, And so they recognize that aspect. What they don't recognize is that capital isn't a negative dialectic. And that despite our desire to want to say that we can just get rid of that the answer is going to be to completely negate capitalism. The reality is you're not going to be able to negate it in the way that you think. Because unlike the typical negative dialectics in which the transcendence is through a dissolution of a limit, each transcendence, each new form, each of society does something more than the lower one. Completely, not just in one place. It does it, generally. It's better in idea. It's one step higher in ideas. It's one step higher in forms of life. It's one step higher in like the inner or the outer forms of life. One step higher in technology. One step higher everything, usually. Though it doesn't have to be. And so they say, look, if feudalism dissolved into capitalism, well, capitalism is going to dissolve into communism, except capitalism doesn't work that way. If you learn what dialectics are from Hegel and you look at the way the argument works in capital is a positive dialectical movement. It's not a negative dialectical movement. It literally, rather than dissolving lower forms, it builds up, upon the lower forms. So the idea that that there's something dialectical in the relationship between capital and communism is just wrong. Marx talks about it and he says, then communism will be the sublation of the true free essence of capital, which is free labor. It'll be the positive sublation of the negatives. Leaving the negatives of capitalism behind. But that's just not really how it works. It doesn't work that way logically, and historically, I can't imagine it works that way. It will ever work that way. It definitely hasn't worked that way.
It hasn't.
Because all you get, if you go and you say, well, okay, we're going to transcend capitalism now, we're going to get rid of commodity production, we're going to just do rational production, you get a new set of limitations which... in their own way are irrational, and and this is definitely a major break with other leftists, and that is that it seems to us that you can't just get rid of these relationships of commodity exchanges and whatnot. I know as the left will come in and say, but alienation and commodity production, and it's unfree labor, and blah blah blah. And from this Marxist perspective, I can see what they mean, but at the same time, that's a limited perspective in that they don't see what the other side of it is, in which is commodity production is strangely, and I took this from Winfield. Winfield has a lecture on that. It's one of the clips on my philosophy channel, in which he talks about the forms of communism, in which, Marx's great dream of communism is strangely one that looks like a very, very, very close match of what the logic of commodities actually is. In which, in abstract, commodities are services rendered with a satisfaction of satisfying myself through satisfying another. Yeah. Which is exactly what Not exactly, but it's very, very close to what Marx actually says he wants communism to be. You know, he wants it to be a world in which everything we do, in the very satisfaction of ourselves, we satisfy someone else. You know, that our individual labor is social labor. That our individual productions are artistic productions which constitute not just us but other people. And that is this is not the place where I can really expand on the logic of this. So probably a bad thing. People will misunderstand this for sure, and I'll have to write something up on this later.
I just see that as a pulchritudinous idealist utopia, I guess.
So yeah, I mean it's too idealist, but
it's not gonna happen.
But it also just comes down to the fact that that strangely looks like a pure commodity society, in which we produce. I produce for myself to produce for you. You produce for you to produce for me. We produce for each other and producing for ourselves. We can't help but make things social.
Yeah, I love a community of social, free producers. What Hegel calls a community of conscious life. Maybe I don't think he meant that, like free producers necessarily, but I think it isn't incompatible with it.
Yeah,
it's just when I think about the idea of this, I'm like, maybe I'm just being too utopian, and I'm like, well, I can't imagine the people that I live around, in rural Georgia, giving a shit about helping each other. I mean, there is this kind of like Southern hospitality type thing that I think should be extended to everyone, but it's not. Once money or objects enter the picture, that stuff disappears. It's purely like, I don't know. Well, okay, think about a party. When you invite people to your party, you're doing it for a social event because you want to be seen as a good person or whatever, on the subconscious level, I guess. But you don't expect people, maybe you ask them to bring something, but you don't make them pay for the food and shit. I think that would be a nice thing to extend to the world, but I don't know.
Yeah, but
the only reason. Yeah, go on.
But the point about the commodity thing is like it's just one that it strangely fits part of like what Marx's ultimate utopia is, which is one of the things in which I think people should recognize that Marx himself doesn't transcend the limits of capitalist thinking in a way, and as should be expected by his very own theory, we can't escape our times. The future seems just like a better version of the modern of today. When you're hungry, what does heaven look like? Well, a garden full of just delicious fruits, just growing everywhere endlessly.
Yeah.
So when your life is a bunch of work that you hate and you despise, and you have no free time for yourself, what does communism look like? Well, when you're fully alienated in those kinds of senses, what does it look like? Well, a world in which we're all together. We all recognize each other, we all do things, as human beings for human beings, we have this direct social connection. But the reality is, if you invite a bunch of people to your party, like you said, do you really know all those people in the party? Are you going to have qualitative connection with all those people in that party?
No.
Not really. And that's kind of how the economy is, this ideal that, well, you ought to know every single person that, has anything at all to ever trade with you or do with you. It's just kind of romanticizing a part of the world that just hasn't existed for a couple centuries already, in which there's only so many people you can actually care about in the world, and so many people you can actually bother with. Sometimes you just want eggs and you don't want to chat with your neighbor.
Yeah, I really don't get that aspect of communism at all. If anything, I want a world where people will just fuck off.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely need a social connection to people. I want a society in which I can talk to people. It's just that...
Well, yeah, friends are important, but
yeah,
I don't want to talk to fucking everybody I see on the street. I want them to fuck off.
Yeah, that's one of the things I dislike about America is people just come up to you and start talking to you, which sometimes it makes you feel good, other times you don't want that. I prefer the European model where people just ignore each other mostly in public, unless they want to, they meet someone at a bar or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, like
But that's
it's just
personal
like yeah, it's just a
preference.
personal preference. Like the only issues like those comes up with like with the fucking tankies who are like complete totalitarians,
Yeah.
and also certain absolute totalitarian communists, of which we know one.
Yep. Really chosen interactions with others are good though.
I mean, also, I mean, it has to do with just pragmatic considerations. It's not just like, oh, well, I don't want to live in this type of society. Well, when that society comes, it's not going to be for us. So, we can't transpose our current ways of thinking or ways of living onto the future. It's like transposing American values into India. Well, India has its own, values and its own like culture, and so some cultures are more social, more communal. Some cultures are more individual, less social. That's just the spirit of each people, so to say.
Yeah, I still think like being cordial with people that are acquaintances, like if to quote like Pessoa. I was gonna say Alvaro de Campos, but that's his pseudonym that he used to. Uh, he meets. He goes to the tobacco shop. He sees unmetaphysical Estevez, and he's like, "Hello," You can talk to the people that you have not much in common with, but not have to know them on a super personal level because you have no interest in them. And I don't want to be elitist, but I do think that most people are boring, and I don't care to talk to them. And now I'm gonna get hate. Oh, you're an elitist. You think you're a patrician or something. But no, I
When some
really
old
don't. I
lady
just
walks
don't have
up
the
to
same empathy.
me on the bus stop and says hi, I turn to her and I'm like, I'm sorry, I only speak to people who like read Hegel. Bye.
Out of the way, mudblood. Would all those born out of wedlock please stand to the side?
If I
So
like,
that the
if I'm walking
fanciest
in the
man can
street
exit
and
the
I
Burger
see
King.
like a homeless person and he asks me for money, I just ask him if he's read Hegel. And he
Yeah.
says no. I just like,
Keep walking.
yeah.
All right, I hate to bash the party, but I
Oh,
actually
yeah.
have to go.
All
Oh,
right.
okay.
Yeah, guys. So I'll see you
Goodbye.
guys later.
See
Bye.
you, Kaya.
You can listen to our heresies afterwards.
Yeah.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good
Yeah.
night.
So
There's this
yeah, go on.
song I like by Proto Martyr that came out late last year, and it said something like, "The scholar will be forever poor." So it made me think like, eventually, probably the homeless people will have read Hegel.
Well, I mean, I think like back in the day, the proletariat used to be like way more well read.
Not generally. Like they were more intellectually inclined. Like there wasn't anti-intellectualism that there was today.
Yeah.
Back then people looked at intellectuals, and if you had a PhD, that wasn't anything like of shame. People were like, oh wow, he has a PhD. He must know. People wanted to know what you knew.
Mm-hmm.
People read the classics because people wanted to be cultured. Literally, like Chomsky talks about this somewhere in one of his lectures. He talks about that. It used to be that in the old guilds, even at the turn of the century of capitalism, 1800s, they would hire reading boys to come and read while they were working, doing their word work or whatever it is they were doing, to read them the classics. Why? Because they wanted to be, even if they couldn't read, they'd listen to them read, and they could, engage with culture that way.
That's good. Now we have.
Yeah, now we have people
What
who just watch the Kardashians.
Well, I don't want to blanket everyone and say everyone watches the Kardashians, but at least where I live, where I have lived in America, which is only 2 places, there was like this I don't want to say it's anti-intellectualism really, but it's like an absence of culture and a pride about that, like prideful ignorance. Like I don't know that, and they're happy about not knowing about it because they think it's stupid or something. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but it happens. And there there are people that don't want to know things, like they don't want to learn, and I don't like being a person who's constantly, searching for more knowledge, not to be better than anyone, but to better myself, learn more things so that I don't act stupidly or so that I can enjoy more things, which mostly has led to noticing how everything is subpar, but uh you discover good things, you discover culture that you would otherwise not be able to engage with. I mean, I always say, like, I'm a poor person. If not for the internet, I would not have seen all of these wonderful classic films from other countries, heard all this wonderful music for free, uh, read all the books that I have read as PDFs. I mean, I buy a lot of physical copies too, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's good that the internet is like a communist type thing where people can interact with who they want and like find out knowledge and what they want. But that's
Yeah, no,
disappearing, kind of, I guess, right?
I don't know,
No,
but
in a
like,
sense. I mean, I think like it's a bit. It allows.
No, I mean, with
strangely enough,
the
it
net
allows.
neutrality disappearing.
We'll
not like
just use
it's
Tor.
Okay.
Well,
we're not
we'll
disintegrating.
use the next thing after Tor because Tor's already infiltrated by the CIA, so we'll just find
Okay, yeah.
whatever is the other thing. But yeah, like going back to commodities, the whole thing is also a pragmatic thing. I mean, like if you're like a proponent of a planned economy, I don't know what's wrong with you because you don't understand just like how stupidly like detailed the economy actually is. Most of the economy, believe it or not, is already planned. It's just not planned in the way that you would want, like socialists
By
want.
you
plan.
with your interest in mind, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's not, everybody. It's a famous slogan. It's like it's not for it's for profit, not for use. But the thing is, how do you figure out the use of these things? What does it mean to like print out, like dildos for use, for example? Do you really want, like the community to come together and say, okay, this year we're gonna plan, to just make 700,000 like dildos, just in case, Well, where are these being made? Who's making them? What are they being made of? Are they rough enough? Are they soft enough? Are they long enough? Are they the dildos that I want? Are they the dildos that you want? Are they the dildos anybody wants? Or are they just like, the cheap generic dildo? Is that really a thing that the community has any fucking thing to be talking about? I don't think so.
No.
and just like imagine like wasting your time at fucking meetings like this. Who the
Yeah.
hell wants to do that?
I don't. I honestly don't. Like, the only problem with our current arrangement, and it's that's wrong to say. It's not the only problem. It's definitely a problem, but it's not the only
Here's
problem.
a problem.
Yeah, a problem is simply that the arrangement of resources. Obviously, the rich can just accumulate capital, accumulate money, and the rest of us, are barely making it by, and we live off, like cheap ass food and whatnot, whatever, barely scraping. The idea, yeah, the idea, the idea of well, we're gonna plan everything. Seems kind of crazy when I don't like anybody planning my shit. Let me tell you, I'm a fickle person with food. Like you can't plan my fucking breakfast, lunch, and dinner because I don't fucking want to. I eat whatever I feel like. Yeah, I eat whatever I feel like. And sure, somebody's born in a system which everything's already planned. They wouldn't care because they never experienced that kind of freedom. But I have, and let me tell you, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose like the capacity to just go and buy myself like whatever clothes I want, any fashions I want. Do all those things, and there's no need to. I mean, it's frivolous shit. The only things that should be planned, and that makes sense to plan, are the things that everybody needs: housing, you know, the infrastructures, health, education.
Yeah, health, education.
That's already planned.
Yeah,
Not
but I mean, like, it's
sufficiently.
not sufficiently planned. I mean, if it was actually
Well, yeah.
planned, if it was actually planned, and like planned in the sense of, you know, for use with no question of like how much is it gonna cost? Who the fuck cares?
Hmm.
You know, like the Republicans, the Democrats, well, that's gonna cost $200 billion over the next 5 years. That's nothing.
All right, let's not do it because we could be spending that money on military.
Tommy, fix your broken arm. Do you realize how much it's gonna cost? I could buy myself a bicycle with that.
I could buy 6 nukes.
Yes. It's basically that kind of argument. It's like, fix your cancer, but you know how much that's gonna cost? I'm sorry, Grandma. You gotta go. Sorry, Mom.
Yeah.
But also, on the other hand, there's other things which I don't think should be planned, nor do I think they should be part of a market, like art, for example. It's probably the easiest example. Should not be commodified because it
Yeah.
ceases to be art.
Well, I mean, you can't stop people from like selling fucking paintings and selling like, I'll make a painting of you for 20 fucking bucks. Well, actually, it costs a hell of a lot more. Like an actual painting nowadays, I think it's like the cheapest you're gonna get is like $500 for, you know, like a 11 by 4, like 10 by 14, you know, original painting from a no name. That's a no name. If you want to get it for some real someone with a name, it's gonna cost you thousands of dollars.
Hmm.
But I mean, I
But
don't
I
care
think,
about
like,
that.
sort of
Like, no. See, I disagree with that because the only thing that needs to be done is the avenues of real art need to be opened up for the possibility of non-commercial art. So, you know, and the only way to open that up is 2 ways. Either make it possible that, you know, someone can live without working, without like doing that kind of stuff.
Or by a museum or something.
Yeah, or I mean, like, just not working. I mean, it's like the state, you know, it's like the universal basic income. You know, I may like be poor and barely making it by, but I'm an artist and I'm just doing art. Because if you can do that, you can do that. I don't care. Like, I'm not.
The argument would be, why wouldn't everyone just do that and not work and be lazy and just make art, quote unquote art, and then?
Well, that's fine. If everybody was making art, that'd be fine. I don't care.
Yeah. Then we would just have to change the structure anyway to support all these.
I mean, there's that,
and
which I mean,
what Marx wanted anyway.
Which isn't something, you know, bad. I think you know, we should have that society. But if you know, like, if that's your thing, that's your thing. You know, if you want to be a NEET who just like makes paintings, go ahead, or music, it doesn't matter. But another thing is, like, you know, if you want to do great art, I think, you know, the state obviously. The state should be funding things. Obviously, you know, like nowadays we have rich people who have no taste whatsoever. Because, you know, before it used to be that the bourgeoisie actually cared. You know, they actually, they did. I mean, like, and then like early Renaissance, I'm talking about. You know, like by the time we get to, like, you know, the modern bourgeoisie, no, they didn't care.
Yeah, by the 20s,
because before that, you know, they fucking, like, you know, the Medici's like bankrolled artists like create all these like art statues and paintings which are like now just cultural classics.
Yeah. Well, in Swan's Way by Proust, that's what his main character, I mean, it's based on his life or whatever. He thought that the bourgeoisie would be, you know, like, he went to Paris, he engaged in Parisian high society, but he found out that they were just as stupid as normal people, you know, and he hated it. Because he was hoping that they would be enlightened and intellectual.
They're the Donald Trumps of the world.
Yeah, they were just body and sort of, you know, what's it called? Narcissistic.
So yeah, I mean, I think there should be like a state budget for just, like, you know, art, whatever that may be, murals, whatever, and
sure,
they don't have to be like specifically for anything. You know, it's just like, here, you know, paint a mural here, because like that's what the city did here. You like there's the downtown is, like, you know, they tried to rebrand it as the mural district, and like they just paid a bunch of artists like, here, make murals of whatever it is that you feel like. They painted some trippy ass shit. Let me tell you, it's pretty cool, but I can't say it's like exactly meaningful stuff, but it's nice looking.
I think this could lead us to another point, because you mentioned state funding. We should talk about our position on the state, since, in the left, most people say, oh, we need to get rid of the state. We need anarchism.
So basically, all right, to summarize that giant section of rambling, we're not anti-market. We don't glorify it, but you're not going to tell me there's nothing good about markets, because there's a lot of shit that comes about it because of it. It's frivolous.
Yeah, but we're not
it's a waste of
socialists,
things. Yeah, we're not market socialists in
the
that
sense of the word, because I don't want to claim to be that because I haven't read anything about it.
Yeah, we're not any specific type of market socialist that people would go by. We just think markets aren't all that bad. They're not the vilest thing in the world.
They're actually good.
They provide for a certain amount of freedom. They provide for a certain amount of freedom. It should not be the only freedom that we're allowed, and obviously it should be an actual freedom, which most people don't have, because most people are basically forced into a subsistence life in which you're stuck where you're stuck. And so that's not freedom as such. But then again, just putting it out there, that's not how it has to be. And people will then come back and say, well, that's just idealism, it's like, because that's the way it is. Not going to get into that, though. There are arguments to be made. There are arguments to be made to counteract that. That's just the way it has to be, because obviously we've had social democracy before, and it can be.
That is never a good critique, a good statement. That's just the way things are. We'll tell that to the French in 1789. Tell that to the Russians in 1916.
Yeah, you're like, capitalism can never be reformed. Well, social democracy happened. It lasted for about 40 good years for the most part. And if it eroded away, it's because people get swindled and lied to and like literally stupid.
33 to. You're talking about like 33 or 73.
For the rest of the world, for the U.S., it only lasted for like 20 years.
Yeah.
But but it can exist, and people don't say, well, then how come it fell apart? Well, if it fell apart, it can be reconstituted again. I mean, capitalism's always falling apart. It's not really much of an argument, and it's mainly fallen apart because of a general misunderstanding of what the system even is and what it actually does. And the capitalists don't understand it. Socialists understand it better, but they also misunderstand it, I think, to certain degrees. Marx himself did not perfect the theory of capital. He did not get it complete. So there are arguments to be had about that. But if Marcus got it done away with, I can't say I'd be the worst thing in the world. They wouldn't be like I'd be fighting tooth and nail to get them back. No, but you definitely have to show. You'd definitely have to do something better, or at least equally close as good at productive nonsense. Because let's admit it, we like the nonsense. We like the frivolous shit. People who are like, well, we can't, have this consumer society. What are you talking about? That's exactly the point of life. We want to have all these possibilities, not that we should be fools who think that consuming is the only thing in life, but it's nice to have all these possibilities open. Sometimes things come about that you didn't even know you wanted, and once you see it, you're like, wow, I want it.
I want useful products and cool shit.
It's like trying a burger for the first time. You're like, you didn't know you wanted it, but your friend's like, come on, try it, you'll like it. And you're like, you try a good burger, and you're like, yeah, it's a good burger. I like burgers. But anyways, on to the state. At least my position on that is you ain't going to get rid of the state no matter what you say. You say, well, the revolution's going to happen, and, the state's going to go away. Whether you're anarchist or capitalist, you're delusional, because if you're an anarchist, look at the Zapatistas, and you say, see, they have no state. Yes, they do. They don't call it a state, but they sure as hell have a state. And the communizer just says, well, the state's going to wither away. No, it won't. What do you think a community coming together and deciding shit is?
Yeah. I personally, and I haven't talked to you about this, but I prefer the model of the city-state to the nation-state. That's me and my Platonism, Hegelianism type thing. But it's still a state, and I like the state. I like the idea of a state doing things that I don't want to do. Do I want to participate in the state? Perhaps, occasionally, if it pertains to my interests, but I don't think I have a say in everything that goes on.
Yeah, here, there's a talk by
Definitely.
Zizek where Zizek goes into this, and he says, like, what are you talking about? He's like, do you really want to, like, be part of, like, a fucking, like, meetings every fucking week about, the stuff that's going on in your little community? Frankly, I don't. I don't care what's going on in my little community. I don't fucking talk to my neighbors. And if my neighbors were people I could talk to, I wouldn't really fucking spend my time talking to them most of the time anyways. I'm just not that kind of person. So, if you want to have a community in which you're very active, go ahead, knock yourself out. It's not my thing, it's just not my business. I don't care. When it comes to like local stuff, it becomes easier to care because, well, it's local stuff. It's closer to home. People are affected by it. Blah blah blah. When it comes to like national stuff, it's just like, or shit, even like intercity stuff, it just starts getting out of proportion. Not only because it becomes increasingly harder to care, but it becomes increasingly harder to understand what exactly is going on.
Yeah, your support or disapproval would be some just abstract notion to you.
Because I mean, like, things are not necessarily simple, as much as we want them to be. Things start out simple, and then eventually, laws build upon laws, rules come about, proceedings upon proceedings, and you get a bureaucratic mess at the end, and it seems to be impossible to really get rid of, except, every once in a while you go back and say, okay, we got to, like, re-simplify everything, weed out all the extraneous nonsense and whatnot. But even then, it's just not everything pertains to you personally, so why would you be involved?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, of course, like, some level of participation in the state is important for freedom, but, I don't care about every single thing. I don't want to be involved, in dildo production, like your example earlier. I don't care.
I mean, if there were some product that I think could be improved in some way, telling them, hey, I would like this feature or whatever, that would be nice. But yeah, not not saying, oh, I don't like that this is happening, so you should do it this way. Yeah, no, I don't care.
And I kind of like the whole town hall thing where you can complain about a local issue, try to get it changed, but when it gets to like a national scale or even like a state scale, it just gets ridiculous.
Yeah. I think face-to-face interaction with the ruling party or whatever whoever's in power locally has to be done. You can't just do it like as a I'm gonna call my local representative or whatever because they don't give a shit. You have to do it face to face as a group to get anything done. You can't just mail them or email them. And they won't look at it or care.
Pretty much. So, perhaps there would be a bit more bureaucracy. Yeah, maybe I think, more integrated lower orders of politics may certainly be necessary. But apart from that, it's like, I'm with Zizek in that I just don't want to make it my business. It's, the reason for a state is, the state should be there and be there in a way that I don't remember that it's there, all right?
Yeah.
When you notice that the state is there, things are going wrong.
Yeah. They're subject to like the will of the people, but I don't know. The problem that I have with elections, though, is that to be elected, you have to want to be elected, and to want to be elected, you're probably entering it for the wrong reason, not representing people.
Yeah, pretty
As
much. And
most
like,
people do. You have to be like Winfield, who is running for election because he actually cares, because he actually wants to change things, because he notices problems in his own community and wants to represent his community's best interests. But
And
no,
like,
hardly anyone's like that. It's a problem.
and obviously should go without saying, the most popular candidate obviously isn't the best. Hillary
Mhm.
Clinton shouldn't be president just because she's popular. Should be a horrible president. She shouldn't be president.
yeah, which brings it back
Luckily,
to
she's
like
not.
determinations of the state, democracy. I mean, generally the left is pro-democratic. There are some anti-political leftists, particularly the more well, part of the left communists, you would communizers some such. They generally are anti-economic. They're not just anti-economics; they're anti-politics. You know, they think like the whole thing is that the state will wither away, and all that would be left is an administrative body in which somehow apparently like politics does not enter, in which public opinion does not enter, in which public desires do not enter. Which is utterly nonsense. I mean, like, really think about it. It's like, what do you think these things are? Like, it sounds too close to a technocracy, but the whole problem with technocracy is precisely that technocracy forgets why the thing exists in the first place.
No,
It's
but
not...
like, the thing is, democracy and politics can never escape the state. No matter what, it's always going to be a part of it. It's always going to be the state's downfall.
In a way, I mean, like, though... if you read Kern's thing, like, that Kern... actually, no, Kern doesn't talk about it there, I think.
John Christopher Kern, we shared
a
the
Marxist
paper on Twitter.
Hegelian.
Yep.
He told me to read a certain section of the philosophy of right and then Marxist criticism of those sections. And it's the sections in which Hegel talks about democracy. And basically Hegel's problem with democracy, in which Hegel does contradict himself, first saying that, it's the will of the people manifest in the state, it's not supposed to have the interest of any particulars. It's supposed to be the general, universal interest. And then, like, he completely contradicts himself, like, 2 seconds down, and basically says, but, the people who get elected to the state, should be the ones who actually know how to run the state. You can't be electing idiots like Donald Trump. Or basically, most of our politicians are fucking idiots. Because they'll just fuck things up. One, they might be there for the wrong reasons, selfish reasons. And two, they wouldn't understand what the hell they do. It's like you can't have people who don't understand economics be ruling about economics. You can't have people who have no idea of law be ruling on things that are about law. You have to have people who know things to some extent, or at least can learn things to come to grips with it. So then he says, oh, well, so then the people ought to give up, their autonomy and, like, look to the people there who, have proven themselves in the fields that they work, so the legislators, should come from the different classes. So, the people who are going to be doing economics-related stuff in the state, well, they should come from, like, have proven themselves as business leaders, administrators, blah, blah, blah. And then the people who are going to do, like, the legal work, they should have proven themselves, through lawyers or blah blah blah. And so what does it turn out? Well, it turns out that, well, then democracy is a farce, because you can't trust the masses who don't know anything to vote in their own interest, but you also can't trust the people who get voted in. Once they can't vote in their own interest, and they can't trust themselves to know what is actually true and worth pursuing as a legal matter, a social matter, it just breaks down the whole freedom aspect. If you can't trust the people, then what's the point? If the people can't trust themselves, then what are they voting for? And that's one of the problems of current democracy. People vote against their own interests because they don't trust that they understand their own interests. They vote for politicians, and the politician says, like, yes, we know we said that we wanted to do this, but guess what? We can't do this. And, it's because of this and that and that. It'll cost this much, and we'll have to raise taxes this much, and we just don't have the money. And, and it'll be a bureaucracy anyways, and all these other things. And so people get bamboozled into voting against their own interests in that way. So, long story short, the problem with democracy, ultimately, the biggest problem is how do you go from a populace that doesn't know the aspects in which it is to vote and voting people to a populace that does know how to vote for people like that. Because does that mean, like, you have to be honest? You can't have everybody know about economics. You can't have everybody know about, like, medical administration. You can't have everybody know about everything. And so, you have to defer eventually to someone who you think knows. But how do you know that they know? You don't know. So, how is it you fix this whole issue?
You don't.
And yeah, and that's my current judgment is I see no way to resolve that issue. The masses can't know everything, and therefore must vote people whom they trust to know things. But how do they know that these people know and will act in their best interest? They don't.
Because they didn't have the forethought to be able to make sure that they can represent their interests. So they wouldn't be able to recognize that, I guess. I don't know. It's just a dilemma.
And I mean, there's like ways you can sort of mitigate these problems.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that can be done. Mitigation, like, the best you can do is, like, you can try to educate people as much as you can, like, base the whole society. If you had, like, obviously, it becomes increasingly hard to believe this in the current state of things, but it's a possibility that the whole educational system could be reformed such that real learning, real freedom of thought is brought into people, so that people are rightly critical in the manners that are worth being critical, and don't care about the rest.
Just another thing, like another one of the same problems. How do you guarantee that the reformers are educated enough to adequately form a new education? Are they?
No, yeah, you don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you got to trust the process of reason.
Creating it and making sure on every level it's secure.
Well, no, I mean, like, you just have to trust the process of reason. That's it. You can't make a leap from here to there. You gotta hope, and you gotta set up a system in which the possibility of self-correction is made possible as something that doesn't take forever. Because right now, that's one of the problems of the current educational system. The whole thing is set up so that changes have to be done in total or not done at all. And therefore, in order to get changes done, it takes a lot.
Oh, yeah, and they tried, like, implementing the whole Common Core shit, but it's not working out.
Yeah, no, it's like none of that shit's gonna work out.
Stupid.
Like, it's just not how real thinking works.
I hate it.
It's not how real thinking works. It's not how real education is done. If we honestly, they should. If it just went back to the system in which teachers, every school, was just basically let be. If you had, like, the only thing they should have is, like, the high school exit exam as a minimum, and that's it. None of this, like, year by year testing bullshit. You learn what you learn. You learn how you learn. Every teacher, if every teacher is the best judge of, like, their own students. No one else is going to be, because they're the ones teaching. So, and if they have bad judgment, well, too bad. It's like, get your kid into a better class. That's all that can be done. It's like, you as a parent have also a duty to recognize, when someone's just not teaching your kid well.
Oh, and of course the problem arises of grades. Students who only care about grades and not learning. They memorize all the words for their tests and everything, and once they have their grades, they like all the information leaps out of their head. They forget it all. They haven't learned shit. They just
Yeah,
want a
yeah, but that's just
good
like the
letter.
modern educational system. Like that's not
Yeah,
inherent
that
to like
and
any educational system as such.
as we're reading, our schools must teach how to think. That's still not a good way to teach.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's you gotta teach real thinking, and obviously people like it's not that people don't know. You know, like even though there are pedagogists who aren't don't know a goddamn thing about Hegel, don't know a goddamn thing about Vygotsky. They know how to teach. You know, we know how to teach, and everyone who's has a brain that's a pedagogue knows that teaching formulas, teaching rote memorization is not teaching. Everybody understands that actual teaching happens through genuine problem solving. You know, you posit a problem, you make the problem evident for the student, you make them interested in solving the problem. The very process of solving the problem is the way that teaching happens, and that's the real learning process. It's the real thinking process. So that's not an issue. It's not that we don't know how to set up a school system that can fix this. We do. Even the bourgeois people know how to do this. It's just there's got to be a political will.
Yeah. I don't blame the students who just passed the test. I was the same way. I didn't care about science or maths, probably because I was taught wrong. Not wrong the problems themselves, but like the way that it was introduced to me was not appealing to me, so I didn't care about it. So I just learned it, did it, didn't care about it, didn't remember it, and now I know nothing about mathematics or the science I was taught in school. But it's not my fault, really. Maybe it was the approach, or maybe it's just not for me. Interest is a big deal.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
learning.
I think the way they teach shit and the way they introduce it, I don't know how they do it, but they design it in such a way to be uninteresting.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, but like let's move on with this. Anything else?
About the state.
Well, anything. I mean, what
I
other
kind of wanted to
positives?
segue into like the humanism, or at least humanizing capitalism.
Okay, yeah.
She just says
So
we can either like reactivate communism or resist, or preserve the profit orientation, so that the remains of social welfare are enhanced, or because there are four antagonisms that he points out, that which are a reason why capitalism cannot indefinitely reproduce itself, and why we need really communism, or at least you know these are the commons which we are all facing. That's what he refers to when he refers to communism, is like the support for us against the commons, the common threats. One is ecological catastrophe. Another is the notion of private property being replaced by so-called intellectual property. Third is the socio-ethical implications of like biogenetics, other techno-scientific developments, and so on, and apartheids, barriers and slums, and so on. So in that sense, I'm still a communist. I think that we need to work together to prevent these problems, or at least to combat them. But humanizing capitalism is not the way to go for that, in my opinion.
let's expand on that.
That oh well, I don't know. Well, there are unrealized potentialities that we need to fully embrace. I don't think that capitalism can ever really overcome any sort of problems that it thrives off of.
Pretty much. So like here's and people are gonna say it. I'm not ashamed. I mean, it's like, what are you fucking doing? It's not like you're better than me. So, they're going to say, well, like, I'm a sock dem. But basically, I mean, let's admit it, at least in where I live at, you're fucking nuts. And like, you're not in this practical material world if you think that you're going to walk around talking to people about revolution in the U.S. You
should never do that.
You just don't understand like where you are. It's like you're walking around in China and you're speaking French. People are not going to understand you.
They may not hit you as much if you speak French in China as they would if you speak about communism here. But
so the U.S. has virtually no potential for a current jump to communism whatsoever, even if the situation got revolutionary. And by revolutionary, I don't mean logical revolution, but simply just like things got bad and the state was in crisis.
Trump fucked up so bad that we overthrow him and
like if Trump fucked up so bad that people actually overthrew him, we wouldn't be overthrowing him for socialism or communism. At best you would get at best the only thing you can hope in the US right now, in the best possible worlds, as Leibniz would say, is social democracy. It's not even
welfare state.
That's the best you could get. That's the best you're going to be advocating. So I'm a practical person. I totally wholly support Marx when he says the real communism is the real movement. Well, if communism is the real movement, this is going to be the real movement. So if you want to stick to your little dreams and go, well, I'm going to stick with communism, well, your real movement is probably 200 years down the line. You can wait for that. You'll be dead. But I'd rather be part of an actual movement that's possible now, that has grounds for it now. Bernie Sanders came around and he showed there is significant desire.
Unrest. Yeah.
It's unfortunately we lack the Lenin. He couldn't capitalize on it. He failed because he could have had he wouldn't have he's not a Lenin moment, but he's a signal for the possibility of a Lenin moment of the left, not of the revolutionary left, but of a sock dem left at best.
Practical left.
Yeah, practical left. And so this is. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the only other really practical, movement we could make is, try to elect one of us as president, get the nuclear codes, and just nuke America. But that's probably not going to happen, so go on.
Yeah, but AW's point is that the idea of communism is only real insofar as it is rational. That means it must grasp the people enough to move them to direct action, because abstract ideal moral theories have no actuality. They have to be rationally viable, move people who are flawed human beings who have desires and thoughts, and you're not going to convince them by telling them you just need to overthrow the government and install what I want as communism.
So yeah, that's it's just not going to happen in the U.S. It could happen in Europe, but it's not going to happen in the U.S. It's not going to happen in Central America.
There's a certain bad mentality that pervades America. I've noticed my time here.
Yeah. So as far as that goes, I mean, I don't even. It's you could call me a sock dem, but I consider myself at least a revolutionary step above the sock dems, in which a sock dem, I think you got to be the logical sock dem is somebody who just advocates for something that literally is revolutionary, even by current standards. The chances of it happening is really, really low, because the kind of society that I would envision as a possibility requires, one, a knowledge of an actual movement of the electorate, which is regains the hunger for being knowledgeable,
requires a new man.
It also requires for them to vote in a bunch of people who admit their own ignorance, but also are aware of the ignorance of the so-called experts, because part of the problem is that today people trust experts far too much. You know, they're like, oh, we can't, you know, who we're going to vote into the to the Federal Reserve. Well, we're going to vote in the fucking top bankers of the country, as if they know anything about the fucking economy. And what they know is how to make themselves rich. They don't care about the economy as such. You know, they don't care about the rest, like, you know, the state of labor. They don't care about the state of capital itself even. They just care about themselves. You know, the fucking capitalists, like, one of the things that makes this possible is that we have notions about money, which makes it such that money is not an issue. Because the fact that money is fiat makes it possible that there is no problem with printing money and paying people directly. Like, the state can pay people directly. So you don't have to have this mediating haggling with, you know, that happens in the market, or no guesswork. You know, you say, well, we need to fix this many roads. It's going to cost this much. Bam. There you go. $3 trillion. Done. Here's the money. Get to it. Is that money going to cause inflation? No. Why not? Well, because it's real labor. It has real value. It directly represents real value. People have done real work for it. You know, is that stuff like going to get done? Hell yeah, it's going to get done. You know, people complain, it's like, but you know, it's like, it costs, you know, so many trillions of dollars to take care of all these old people. You know, they should all die. It shouldn't cost anything, because you know why? Because the doctors are doing their fucking job. The fucking people who are bringing in the materials, the doctors are doing their fucking job. The nurses are doing their fucking job. Fine, you don't want to pay them, just take and directly pay them. More money getting to the economy. I mean, that's all that the economy requires. It requires money to keep moving. You know, the problem with capitalism isn't that money. It isn't, oh, I'm alienated from the products of my labor and all these things. That most of the alienation is, I don't fucking have money and I'm fucking starving here. I'm barely making it. I'm barely living.
And the money that's funneled into the economy via purchases mostly sits and does nothing. It goes to the bank accounts and it just accumulates forever.
Just goes to Panama.
Yeah, it goes to offshore bank accounts.
So yeah, so money's no issue. The organization of labor is even no issue. Like the plan, I basically say, like, I'm almost for a dual economy. And there's a guy we know. He goes by the name of Bryce Francis Edwards. He's written some critical, he's written some critical Marxist essays in which he's not your typical Marxist, and he's actually more worried about the practicality and the logical form of things. And he himself, is no longer for this idea like he used to be, but he's actually weakening on the idea of the planned economy himself. And he's like, you know what? He's like, I don't even think that we need a dual economy. He's like, it seems to be that if simply the money was allocated enough things, things could get taken care of. Since the systems were made to make things flow in the right way, and then people will complain. He's like, oh, but the rich people, won't want. Nobody will make businesses if you gave them 90% taxes. Fuck you. Yes, they will. They did in the fucking 50s.
They did in the 50s, up until 1973.
Yep. It's like, it's not. Oh, they won't. They're not making enough. The golden age of capitalism.
Yeah.
They're not making, if they're not going to make enough money, who's going to make a business? Well, apparently they were making enough money then. They just felt it wasn't enough, so they fucking brought it down.
Yeah.
So, like literally we have a stupendous amount of just labor potential. Whether it's planned through planned economy or whether it's, just let flow the gates of money just to... I'm
cut out. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I don't really care whichever it is. Whichever, whatever makes life better is basically my position, and I think that's the position of every goddamn person on this world that has any normal brain. All they want is a better life. If you can offer a better way of life, great. But you gotta offer an actually better way of life, because if what you offer afterwards turns out to not be what you promised, don't be surprised if eventually you regress. People are complaining, oh, Cuba's regressing back into capitalism. Why do you think that is? Is it because, Cuba was just this paradise before? Did you think that the Soviet Union was this fucking paradise before? People wanted something more. They saw something more possible. It wasn't possible. It didn't become possible afterwards. But, you can't tell people that you're the best, that you have a better way of life, and then they see that other parts of the world have something better. Because the question then arises, well, why don't we? What's the problem?
Yeah.
And that just returns it to the issue of revolution, I suppose, in the end, in which I'm all for the attempts. Free yourself of imperial domination, free yourself of capital domination. But if you can't offer a better life for people, then you're going to find yourself regressing in just a couple decades, at best.
Mm-hmm. Communism is something that deals with need. And markets deal with luxury.
Yeah,
So
that's a big point.
The two aren't incompatible.
Yeah, that's a big point. Capitalism, communism. The big thing about communism is production for use, production for need. Well, the categorical needs are housing, food, education, and the and the infrastructure and the open possibilities of freedom. That's it. Those are the human needs. How those human needs are met is a whole different thing that is nobody's business. How I meet my feeding needs is none of your business. How I meet my sexual needs is none of your business. How I meet my, creative needs is none of your business. How I meet the needs of my livelihood is generally none of your business.
You're eating, housing, and, well, not housing, but like your eating and pleasure needs are not infringing on anyone else's freedom.
Yeah, that's a given, though. But,
so. I know, but some people might bring that up. Like, what if it's none of your business? Well, what if you're doing something that's bad? Well,
that's why we have a thing called the state and laws.
Yep. And these are not at all incompatible with our idea of communism, the Zizhekian idea of communism as a movement that has to be reinvented in each new historical situation, not just something that was written down and to be followed.
So there's a joke we have here. If you ever seen the stupid image of socialism, capitalism, and super capitalism, the joke is we advocate super capitalism, and part of it is true. What if the best thing we could get is say like a Richard Wolff co-op economy? Great, that's way better than what we have now. If we could get something like a Winfieldian, super social democracy. Great. Way better than what we have now.
Yeah. We could go into the specifics of democracy in the workplace is something that we would advocate for.
Yeah, sure. There's various ways to ensure that. Those are generally things, though. I don't know. Like that's kind of like a social thing. How big is too big? At what point does.
Cut out again.
The question is like how big is too big?
Yeah. Yeah, I want higher productivity, not for ever expanding capital, but productivity for the production of better products in a post-scarcity world. No planned obsolescence and things like that. People are waking up to planned obsolescence. People have known about planned obsolescence for going on at least 10 years. But most people ignore it, because they don't care. Now, with Apple having brought out the iPhone, I believe it is 8 for $700 and the 10 or X, I guess it's 10, it's a Roman numeral X, for some exorbitant amount, 3,000 or something, I don't know. They're like, hey, why are you selling this inferior product if there's a better one? And their guarantees only last a year, right?
I have no idea.
I think they do. And, you know, it's clear that they got sued. Everyone knows they got sued because of the iPhone 6, I believe, having a defect that made it break at a certain point. So yeah, planned obsolescence is something that would go away in an ideal world. Ideal in the sense of, you know,
Yeah, it's cancer.
best. Yeah. Yeah, I'm an idealist in the sense that I imagine the ideal supreme mode of the world, I guess, you know. Not in its totality yet, but
That's why you don't trust everything to private enterprise. I mean, like, here's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if private enterprise is like being planned obsolete, like doing planned obsolescence shit. Like, you can't stop it. What are you gonna do? Like, force them to make better products? A lot of them are like, I mean, like,
we'll stop buying. There's always this oh, they're canceled, which means now that liberals aren't going to buy from them or
yeah, but
acknowledge them.
who cares about that? I mean, like, if we want
Yeah,
product,
that
like,
doesn't
you know,
fix it.
for things that are quality, like, what do you like? That's why you don't trust like fucking private enterprise.
Yeah.
You have, you know, public enterprises for that shit. You want quality light bulbs, get a state enterprise to do it.
Yeah.
Because the state enterprise isn't there for profit. You know, if it only has to run like once a century, well, once a century it shall run, and then we have light bulbs for the next century. Great. And then, you know, all these people are going to be complaining, but you're running, you know, the light bulb industry out of work. Great. That's exactly what we want. We don't want to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's people complaining. It's like, but you know, you put us out of work. Well, great. That means you're free to do other things, right?
That would be like complaining that Henry Ford put the stagecoach and buggy video businesses out of business.
No, pretty much. I mean, people make these arguments. Like people who are in the coal areas are complaining. Like the solar people are pulling us out of work. Well, great.
Great, work for them. Work for the solar.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, of course, it's understandable why they're against it, because like they lost their jobs, and they have
I agree with
no
it.
backup.
I understand their plight. It's awful. It's not good, but
yeah, it's a contradiction of pure capitalism. Like here's just to continue on that, I suppose, to start to finish this off somewhat. The state, far from being just a tool of capital, can actually leash capital. We know it can because it has happened historically already. We have laws. You know, we have minimum wage laws. We have work week hour laws. We have overtime laws. We have labor laws. We have limits on capital. They're there. Are they absolute and unbreakable? No, people are always breaking them all the time. But, you know, there's a general obedience to them. Likewise, we had the existence of social democracy, in which we taxed the shit out of the rich people, and they suffered it for a couple decades. And the only reason it stopped is because people didn't understand why this worked, and why certain crises were occurring that had nothing to do with the internal dynamics of the economies.
Yeah.
And they got bamboozled, and this has to do with the ignorance of people. You know, it was the most educated generation, but it was a generation that was educated stupid. So, you know, they did fine, and they're like, well, you know, I learned economics, and, you know, it was like, you know, the supply and demand. Well, yeah. Yeah, economy. It was supply and demand. And, you know, Reaganomics and all these other things. So, you know, smart people got bamboozled by sly politicians and, you know, not trusting themselves. Yeah, in the pockets of businesses. And so, you know, things went backwards. Maybe they'll start going forwards. It doesn't seem like it. We're in a slump right now, but hey, you know, when you go down, either things are going to go into like full crisis mode and shit's going to blow up, history's going to happen again, or, you know, we start going back a little bit forward towards a social democracy maybe. And this time, if they actually cared to do it good, to do it well, you know, they'd have to understand the ways in which the economy actually runs, and that would require actually understanding economics, in which I think Marx is generally right. You know, except that you just need to make some amendments about the nature of money, the nature of, you know, labor and capital, and how the whole thing, you know, the dynamic feeds into itself. And then you'd always have these, not just state limits, but you'd have to start setting cultural limits. You'd have to switch culture tracks towards not glorifying profit, not doing all these things. And then people say, well, how is that going to happen? That's not.
Well, because people wouldn't give a shit about profit being the motive if they get real efficiency. Because efficiency in and for itself is not for making money, but it's for making life better for people by way of efficient products or whatever they want or need. And I think if people had that, they wouldn't be like, well, the businesses aren't making enough money.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so, like, the whole issue about that is, like, it requires basically a shift in ideas. But how is the shift in ideas going to be affected?
Effective?
Affected.
Or, affected? Affected? I don't know.
Well, made possible.
Wait, are you saying effected? Like made actual? Oh,
yeah,
okay,
effected.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, that's a question of
Yeah,
just
that's the
like
question.
practical reality, and nobody's going to answer that with theory, because you say, well, we got to have a revolution. Well, great. How are you going to do it? That's no more of an answer than it is, we got to reform the state. Well, great. How are you going to do it?
We gotta create an AI that does everything that should be done for us. Well, great. How are you gonna do? I don't know what else I want to talk about. I would just go on some like OCD rant about rights and stuff, but that would take hours.
Yeah, I mean, we believe in rights. I know Marxists don't. You do. You just don't call them rights.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to have a not good society.
And you're acknowledging that your ideas aren't worthy of being taken seriously if you don't acknowledge the rights of being able to say what should be.
I mean, this usually comes from the anti-political Marxists, who are just,
Do we know any of those? Not really.
We know a communizer or two.
Oh yeah, true.
They're generally anti-political. And if you're anti-political, like that just shows that you actually have a lower vision of humanity than we do.
Yeah.
Because you literally don't think that different people can actually mediate themselves rationally. Therefore,
I mean, I'm pessimistic, but I'm not. I haven't lost all hope.
Because that's basically the point, the basis of anti-political and anti-economic communists, which is.
Yeah. We cut out again.
I don't know why that's happening. So they literally don't believe that people can actually mediate themselves rationally. Therefore, politics is not possible. Therefore, economics is not possible. And the only hope that we can have is...
is what? Shit.
Is post-scarcity communism, where we, technology just has produced everything in such mass abundance that we don't need to necessarily deal with each other. So, politics is not necessary.
Which is going to come about for the bourgeoisie, if anything.
Yeah, like Elon Musk is going to create fully automated luxury homosexual communism.
Just for him on Mars.
So yeah, there's that. Another thing, well, I believe in private property. Eat me if you disagree, but I like having my things.
What do you mean by this?
Okay, like
personal property. Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay, that's the thing. Like, yeah, that's what they're gonna say. Like, that's a bullshit distinction. Like, that doesn't exist. Like, that's just not.
I can see why they make that distinction, but it ultimately doesn't hold up.
Yeah, it doesn't hold. Like, I mean, it's not an actual logical distinction. It's an arbitrary distinction, because personal property can indeed begin as personal and become private in the senses that they talk about, meaning like use for employing others in capital. No contradiction whatsoever. But if that were to happen, then on what basis do you have like to take it away from somebody other than it's like, well, I need this. Well, that's no basis to take things away.
Yeah,
Unless, like,
but
you know,
how do
like literally, unless like somebody's life is on the line, like there is generally no basis for like taking people's shit away. Even if like, well, I really could use this. Well, too bad, it's my lawnmower.
Yeah, I'm just curious how we make that jump from that, which I agree with, to collective bargaining being established as a right of the workers.
Because that whole engagement already begins as social. Like there is no
Yeah.
like there's no
True.
mediator. Like it's not about properties because like
Yeah, but how do you have management and planners that are chosen collectively by the workers in advanced industry if they're hired by the corporate body of workers and they don't choose the boss who started the company?
I mean that's Winfield talks about that one. You know, it's like half the
Okay.
board is made out of like non-managerial workers, so like the regular workers. So it's not like the manager's getting elected up there. No, it's a regular Joe Blow Joe. I don't know, Mary Juanita. I don't know.
A metaphysical estivate.
Yeah. Either way, some normal person, you know, half of them are going to be on the board. Why? Because half the people most of the people that work in this stupid place are normal people. You know, their concerns are different than the managers, or different than the bosses, and they're real concerns. So, I mean, is that infringing upon property right? Not really. I mean, it's like the whole relation is between you and me, so obviously it's got to be, the decision has to be between you and me. So it's not infringing upon property rights. You're not letting me do what I want to do with my property. Well, what do you mean? Like, what you want to do with your property is something that's going to be done to me, so I gotta have a say in it.
Yeah, like none of it has to do with property as such at all.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately I don't really care, because when things become crucial, like you know, the state has a standing to just go and say, okay, well, fine, you know, your property now belongs to the people, meaning the state. It becomes public domain. You didn't want to get this going. Usually, it's the opposite, because you know the states are pushed lean capitalists up to now. But you know, there is no logical contradiction between having a state that leans towards the workers. So you know, there's a strike. You know, it goes on for a week, and you know, the state comes in and says like, "Oh, well, you know, what's the problem? You know, the whole industry is stopped." And they're like, "Well, you know, the boss doesn't want to agree to our demands." And you ask for demands, so they seem reasonable, and you go, "Well, you're the boss." You're like, "Yeah." Are you gonna give in? No. Well, your company's now ours. You know, they usually send the military to make the workers work. You can send in the military to get the fucking boss out. But that's just you know, figments of our imagination. That has nothing to do with our actual reality. The real movement of things is nothing that we are talking about in like our stupid blogs and chat rooms and like little dumbass 10-person parties.
True.
So you know, I'm wary of anybody who puts out any theory that purports to like be guiding any mass praxis when there is no mass movement that they're aligned with.
They're right about the material conditions, but they presuppose that they can make the conditions the material conditions serviceable, because like you need the proper material preconditions and not just a resolute will instead of good ideas, but you can't force it really, not actively at least.
Pretty much. And so we've been going for 2 hours and 10 minutes just rambling.
Yeah. Overall, we should save what's best in the liberal ideal, that is freedom, equality, und so weiter, etc. And we've begun to see the consensus that capitalism is the best system, or rather, not the best ever, but the best we can think of at this present moment. That's disintegrating, so I have some hope for the future.
Yeah, I gotta have hope for the future as well. can't say I have any idea what that future exactly is. But I mean, literally in the long run, I think that unless like we really nuke ourselves, humanity is going to generally be okay. Even with global warming, you know, I know a lot of people are alarmist about the global catastrophe, and it may wipe, you know, probably half the population, if not more. But hey, you know, humanity will survive.
Social Darwinism.
Yeah, and I mean, the good thing about humans, of course, is our freedom. Things are going to change eventually. Somehow, no state will exist forever.
Yeah.
No planet shall go unconquered. We will be on Mars soon.
yeah. I'd like to end with my favorite quote by Marx: "Progress is a hideous god who drinks the nectar from the skulls of the slain." Progress is necessary, in other words, but it comes at a horrible price. The world history isn't just some exhilarating tale of progress, but it's also not a long red nightmare of blood. It just means that I'm not pessimistic about it. It just means that, like, to arrive at a felicitous outcome, we must first go through some sort of hell. And whether the arrival of whatever comes in the future is worth the journey remains to be seen. But we will see it. We'll see something in our lifetime.
Yeah, definitely things will happen in our lifetimes. You know, if it comes to be a possibility that we can take part in it, I will definitely take part. And I shall be for the left. You know, like, let me say, if it came down to like tankies versus capitalists, I will side with the tankies.
Yeah, me too.
Just after the revolution, you know, we can start the second struggle.
Yeah.
So let's. There you go. If you cared about any of our views, there were some more mashed up views and whatnot.
Yeah, this wasn't really anything we wrote down or anything, so it's not very coherent, probably, but we tried.
Yeah, it was just rambling. We know there are some fans out there who somehow want to know this stuff, but hope you're satisfied. Maybe we'll do this again in a more coherent manner some other time. Either way, see you around.
I don't know if they'll watch it anyways. It's not the now videos, so.
As I know some people definitely seem to watch all our videos and they find them interesting, so.
We take recommendations too, so.
Just don't recommend crap, because I'm not going to read crap.
Yeah, please don't recommend some meme. We don't care about the meme philosophers anymore. We did a few of them, and they were boring.
But anyways, goodbye.